Hey everyone, this is Belinda Carr. Welcome back to the Boost AC podcast, where we dive into the world of construction and explore the stories of people and companies who are shaping the future of our industry. I've got yet another exciting podcast for you today. I'm speaking with Aaron Holm, former co-CEO of Blokable and now founder of Patient Circle, where he is a coach and advisor. Thanks for joining us, Aaron.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, we've spoken a couple of times in the past, and your career path is pretty fascinating. You've had a very interesting and unconventional uh, career, to say the least. I guess you started off kind of in the media industry. You were at Amazon for a while, and then you jumped into Blokable, the modular construction business, for around 8 years, and now you're more in the I guess mental health advocacy realm. So I would love to dive into all of that, and especially Blokable, because I guess our audience would be fascinated to know more about your work at that company.
Sure. Yeah, I maybe the issue was I never designed the career, so it just
Yeah,
sort of like took
happened.
the path took the path it was going to take. I grew up in Canada. I grew up in Toronto, and my early work was in media and technology, so broadcast, early days of transitioning as media was transitioning, video and audio were transitioning from analog to digital. I worked in sound engineering in animation, so I was a mix operator and sound engineer on shows like Babar and The Neverending Story and Ace Ventura. And then I was IT director at a national broadcaster. And then I got the entrepreneurial bug and I moved down to the States and started a software company for a friend. And then when I got my green card, I started my own company doing integrations of large media systems for the U.S. Navy and for Victoria's Secret and folks like that. And then
Was that
mo-
Mileo, right?
no, that was Markham Street Media. That was the first company I started
Oh,
in the States. And then I sold that. I had that for about a year and a half, and then sold that and became a partner in a company called Industrial Color. And my friend Steve and I built that business. We built a 30,000 square foot headquarters in Tribeca in New York, and we had office in Culver City. We owned Smashbox Studios. We owned Fast Ashley Studios in Brooklyn, and then ran that until 2012 and sold it to a private equity group, and then moved out here and co-founded a software company around sort of digital memories and photos. That was Mileo, and that's still growing. It's a really cool technology. It's sort of like managing large libraries of photos and videos so that they're replicated across every device on your phone, on your laptop, on your iPad without the cloud. So you don't need the cloud, and yet you have everything with you all the time. And then I spent 2 years at Amazon on working on the physical retail business, so the cashierless grocery and the bookstore. And that was fun because it was, just figuring out a whole bunch of business and technology problems. Like what are we going to sell? What can sell with the technology? Designing point of sale systems, designing store categories and layouts. And it was wild. It was work I'd never done before. So it was really interesting because it was like getting underneath these problems, and that was the work. It was like, hey, go figure out how big the store should be, what we should carry, how many of each item we should carry, develop a process to stock and build the whole store over a course of 5 or 6 months. And then I got the bug. Then we
like
were we
okay,
were
I figured all this out. I want something new that I know nothing about, and I want to start a new business.
it was, but you know what, it came from watching the process when we were building the bookstore. So the bookstore was crazy. Like we started it in March, and we had nothing. We didn't know what it was going to be called. We didn't know the location. We didn't know what we were going to sell. We didn't have any systems. And
Are you
we
talking
opened the
about the
doors.
bookstore or the
Amazon Books.
but you also mentioned the cashless store, the one where you walk in,
Yeah.
the one that you kind of see at airports.
Yeah, so that was the genesis. I was there at the beginning, which was
Ah,
called,
okay.
at that time it didn't have a name yet, and then it became Amazon Go. And Amazon Go was a grocery concept where it would be sort of a mid-sized store or smaller format store, and there was no checkout. So all the tech was about when you come in, then it would know kind of what you took and what you didn't take, and there were all these crazy circumstances. Like imagine someone walks into the store and they've got a dog and a toddler and a in a stroller, and then they take a thing of olive oil and then they put it back, and then they take two things over here. Like what have they actually bought? So there were a lot of interesting scenarios to consider in sort of the product management. But then the store kind of morphed and it turned into a larger format store, and they tried different formats of it. And then it turned into just walkout technology, which ended up being the basis of a lot of stadium and airport grocery and grab and go sort of food scenarios. So like if you go to Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle, where the Kraken play and where they have concerts, there's a whole bunch of these just walkout experiences. So that was kind of the beginning of all that. But working on the bookstore, I really saw how most of the inefficiencies in the process had to do with the conventional construction process, construction development. So I kind of got the bug for it. We were working a lot, like building the point of sale system and building, a lot of the fixturing for the store. We were working on, a lot of prototyping. And so we were able to kind of build things really fast and then try them out in a lab environment and see what worked and see what didn't work, and then make changes and make alterations, and all based on how people were actually experiencing it. And did they prefer this? And did this work better? Like a very much a product management approach to designing a physical space. And we could iterate, we could do things really quickly and make changes and make improvements. All of that was internal. But then when it went to, like, when we went to go build the bookstore, I mean, it was a 5,000 square foot store, very simple. And everything had to be, I mean, all the delays and all of the risks were just in permitting and building this very simple store. And so I kind of got the bug for, material innovation, prototyping, short run manufacturing. And at the same time, the housing crisis was hitting West Coast cities. This was
2014,
2015.
15.
Yeah. And so I started to just see like all the inefficiencies of what it took to get something from concept to occupancy, and realized that there was a need for, things that a lot of folks have seen, but things like the need for standardization, productization, repeatability, using manufacturing. So what seemed to obvious to me at that point was eventually the market will need to move towards manufacturing. It'll need to lean on manufacturing more for the built environment. It'll need to use different types of materials, and it'll need to standardize and productize, because otherwise there's an imbalance between the amount of what needs to be built and what can be built. So that was the first phase of it. And then the second phase of the realization was that the construction side alone won't be able to do it because of the nature of development. And so it's actually development as a discipline and a process that controls, because the early days in Blokable, we first start working on our product designs, and any developer who you talk to, they don't really care about what the product does. They're just like, well, what's your price per square foot? And so it starts to dawn on me. I'm like, well, that it doesn't really matter. There's going to be no incentive on our side to build something good or better, or that's long lasting, or that operates better, or that's more efficient.
When price is
Because
the only thing that developers care about.
now the developer's just going to ask, what's the price per square foot? So we quickly started to build out a model where the incentives aligned, where, if you're able to build, and there's a lot that goes into the product development process, like, what's the market application? Are you building single family homes, high rises, missing middle, townhomes, walk-ups, garden style, 5 over, like there's all these different market applications. And that's what drives the product development, because the product development needs to be able to build for the market application. So you need to design and build a product that you can, to some degree, manufacture in a repeatable and standardized way that's going to make an impact on the economics of development. And then you need to be able to realize the benefits of the of the impact that you can make on the economics of development. So we created a model where, because from the beginning, the goal with Blokable was to really solve the core issue of housing, which was twofold. One, it needs to be the developer that innovates, because that's where the incentives are and that's where the returns are. And two, it needs to address both market rate and affordable housing. because currently those are separate markets, separate incentives, separate finance structures. And so those were the two very clear goals that we had. And we made a ton of progress towards those.
Yeah. So,
Mhm.
and your website is still functional, and like you just said, one of the slogans on your website is that we are reinventing multifamily housing creation as the world's first modular developer.
Mm.
Not modular builder,
Yeah.
not modular designer, modular developer. And I guess that's what's kind of set you all apart from everyone else. Do you
Yeah. Well,
think
I think
you're a little too early to that, or
it's
how
possible.
successful were you in becoming the world's first modular developer?
Well, I think we were very successful in establishing what that meant and determining how it would work and coming up with the different aspects of what it means to be vertically integrated. So on the one side, we created and built the engineering for a 5-story steel-based multifamily building system that could go anywhere in California. So the structural for seismic, the fire separation, all the code, like the difficult sort of code aspects of being able to build multifamily. We invested a lot of money and time and engineering in solving some of those in a very practical way, knowing that the path was for us to manufacture and knowing the complexities of that path. So on the product side, I think we made a ton of progress in demonstrating that that's viable and demonstrating what that does to cost. And then on the business model side, we really did figure out and we ran into some issues which had to do with how the capital markets are structured to finance this type of activity because that's not how it's done. And so we ran into the issue of, this is how it should be done. And here's
This is
how
how
it's
it's
done now, and
currently
here's
done.
here's where the
Yeah.
money comes from. So you're like, well, because the thing that we discovered and that we knew intuitively that it was true, but then we really modeled it out and got into the details on the real estate side. And we said, well, if we're the developer, so rather than being a modular construction company that tries to sell as a construction service to the developer on a per project basis, if you compare that and if you assume that in that model, a very successful, track record company in that model might be able to command 10 to 15% margin on a per project deal. So if you compare that, and if you just assume 15% to be conservative, if you compare that to being the developer and holding the real estate, owning it for at least 10 years, the incentives are very different. So you're not trying to make the margin on the project. You're trying to make the takeout financing. You're trying to make the refinancing. You're trying to make the net operating income. Your incentives are very different. And we saw when we modeled it, it's 30x. It's 30x the profits to be the developer. There's a ton of reasons why it doesn't happen, some of which are cultural and some of which are just inertia, the way that the market works. And because we also noticed that in the history of modular, there seemed to be sort of two pathways that companies started and got going. One was a construction company decided they wanted to be modular, right? And so they would create a factory and they would do modular building within the factory, which tended to be, pretty straightforward, not that innovative, like basically you could build it on site, you could build it in the factory because the construction company wants to have that kind of optionality. So coming from the construction or development industries, people would create a factory, and usually when the market was really expensive for framing, and then when the interest rates changed, then the factories would die, and then the other trend was folks would create modular businesses who came from the tech industry,
Yeah.
and they tended to completely misread and misunderstand the nature of regulations and code and get very frothy about the opportunity in the market because it's such a giant market and giant industry, and then just kind of flounder around and not really get to the point where they can repeatedly build and do stuff. And so our part of what was unique about what we were doing is, I had a certain background and my co-CEO had a different background. And between those two, we understood, product development, finance, development process, all of those different aspects. And so we had a bit of a different lens to it. We ran into an issue where when we were raising financing for the big round that we wanted to do to
The most
build a big
recent one.
factory, yeah, for it was two things. One, we realized that pool of capital was very rare, And two, at that point in the market when the interest rates had changed, investment had dried up in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. So that's what we ran into. But it was still like I think the forward evolution of it's inevitable. Um, developers will have to innovate. To me, that's the inevitable aspect of it because that's where the incentives are. And so I think it'll, in the next cycle, it'll happen more. I
Yeah.
think the model will end up becoming the de facto model. It's just a matter of time.
But up to that point, up to the latest round of funding that didn't go through, were you able to fulfill that dream of yours of being a developer and holding a building for a significant amount of time, or were you all still just the did you all still just make modules and sell it to developers?
No, we never sold to any developers.
Okay,
Every property and every project that we built, we
you
developed.
were developed. Okay.
They were prototyping. So there's one of the big gaps in this particular market is the lack of, and there's a report. I can send it to you if you want to link to it the work that we did with NREL was interesting because I sort of worked with the team at NREL to sort of point out this major structural issue in the marketplace, which is in the built environment, there's no concept of sort of short run prototyping. And so people try to make the leap to manufacturing and they're not ready. There's no readiness for manufacturing because there hasn't been enough stabilization to justify true manufacturing because projects are still one-off projects. They have one-off designs, they have one-off aspects. So there's this thing that's missing in the middle. You have, construction is here and manufacturing is here, and the difficulty is here in the middle where how do you develop assemblies and how do you develop, manufacturing process that's repeatable and makes a significant impact on cost and time, given the fact that, construction is here, manufacturing is here. You can't just leap to manufacturing. You need to go through this process. So, when we were our model was we knew that we knew that, call it 5 over multifamily was the product application that we wanted to be really good at and repeat. But to get there, you don't want to go out of the gate building a 100 unit project. That's too many. So how do you marry product development where you're trying to move fast and solve problems, right? With market application where particularly in multifamily, the economics of multifamily and the benefits of standardization and productization are most in higher density multifamily projects, call it 100 units, 200 units. That's where it really hums in terms of a process. But in order to get there, you have to figure out structural, mechanical, assemblies. You have to figure out all these different aspects of it. So what we did, which I believe was the right approach, first we built ADUs. We didn't build them because we wanted to be an ADU builder. We built them because we wanted to take down a site and build out the scheme, understand the assembly, understand the labor, understand the process, logistics, trucking the unit, putting it in place, getting it permitted, getting it approved, getting it inspected, doing all that. So we did that for not a ton, but we wanted to do it for a small number of projects because we wanted to move quickly and we wanted to solve some of the core aspects of the problem. What's the envelope? What's the energy efficiency? What are the materials? What are the costs? All those things. And then from there, we built a connected project where now we said, okay, now let's bring them together. We don't want to build big stuff yet. Now let's build a smaller, we used 3-story engineering and we built a 12-unit connected project because now you have to look at, fire separation and connected structural and just different issues. So we did that.
That seems like a
And
very level-headed approach. You all
it
didn't
was
just storm, yeah.
level-headed, no doubt. But then the issue, one of the core issues with product development and manufacturing and real estate is, and this is the issue a lot of companies have run into with modular. There's a couple of places where, you just fall into the valley, right? And one of them is there's a lot of incentives to go and try and build a bigger project early. And it's a disaster. It's almost always a disaster because there's just too many problems to solve, right? And so you end up stopping any work on product development and now you're just solving all the project problems because there's too much in the project to go figure out. So then your product development efforts stop. And it's very difficult to kick them and restart them again. A lot of folks end up there. The other issue is the time it takes. Like for instance, we had a project in Napa where we had identified the site. We had gone through city planning. We'd gone through the city council. It was a SB 35 site. We had a density bonus. Everything was lined up. But the time that it took between when we first submitted our drawings for the site and when they were approved and ready to go, we didn't want to build it anymore because we'd solved all these problems along the way. So why would we go back and build this thing that now we know is inefficient because we solved a bunch of the problems that were the function of the inefficiency? And now, so we walked away. We said, we don't want to build this project. It probably would have been a cool project to build. And this is where the disconnect is, where between the investors who are looking at progress and the understanding in the built environment about what it means to be actually ready to build. We didn't build that project, and instead we took the money that we would have invested in building that project, and we invested in the engineering. So we invested in, instead
Because
of
y'all
doing
had
that,
identified that was the next stage that y'all wanted to tackle or perfect.
well, we knew where we wanted to be when we started our next build,
Mm.
and that that phase took an amount of capital to be ready for it. That in early stage company financing, you know, the thing that you'll see a lot is companies move to scale production too early, and there's a bunch of companies that do that where they haven't established the market application. So they go to build something repeatedly, but it's the wrong thing, right? And that capital investment in the manufacturing, particularly in the manufacturing facility, equipment, and labor, is sort of like a one-shot deal. You do that, like we had a 30,000 square foot factory, then we had a 60,000 square foot factory, but each one of them was mapped to the problems that we were trying to solve. So the first facility was just about steel and structural. Like, how do you put these things together? Is it a moment frame system? How does the joint work? How are we going to attach things to it? What's the material application? Then in the 60,000 square foot plant, it was more, what's the labor model? How are we going to store materials? How long does it take time and motion studies to be able to get through these things and understand what the time is on the building? How do we get trucks in and out? How do we lift them? There's all these kind of, details you have to get to. In a lot of cases, there's been a number of factories, big sort of factories that have kind of gone under because the market application isn't solid enough before you go out and scale it. So
in your
yeah.
experience, to avoid that sort of misfit between what you want to do and what the market demands, is a trial and error method the best? Or because all these companies that I'm actually working a video on certain modular companies that failed in the past year or so, and it was it that they just focused on the theoretical side of it, where they were just looking at the market fit and the potential and hypothesizing a possible niche in the market that they could fill? Or like, it seems like what y'all took a different approach, where y'all did tests and figured out, okay, is this are we going to fit into this particular market, the ADU market, or should we scale up and try to go into the multifamily market? Like, is the theoretical approach better than a practical approach?
No, I mean, we knew very early on that we were going to build multifamily,
Okay.
but we also knew the complexities of multifamily. And so the thing is, how do you prioritize the problem solving? Because if you want to go build multifamily apartment buildings, let's say, it really depends on how you prioritize the investments that you're making to solve the problems. Because you'll hear things like someone, you might think, in order to solve multifamily, the most important thing is, and I've heard this from people, like, let's get rid of drywall. You're like, oh, okay, well, you can get rid of drywall. That's not going to solve your problem. Or, so what are the things that you need to figure out? And if you figure them out, who benefits? Because the big issue is, remember, like, this is the problem a lot of folks, the reason that a lot of folks chase different market fit and different market application is because they listen to what their developer customers are telling them, right? And the truth is, the developer customer just wants a cheaper price per square foot.
Yeah.
So where all this stuff falls apart when the markets change is when interest rates change and developers pull out of projects. Developers typically will survive because they're designed for it. They don't carry much of overhead, right? So a typical development company has a model to deal with recessions because recessions are a natural course of business in real estate. Manufacturing for those customers, the moment those, so what happened in the last cycle was, money was cheap for investors. So folks went out and raised, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, and then took down factories, got equipment leases, hired a bunch of people to go and build the pipeline of real estate development that their developer customers had signed some degree of like LOI or agreements, which was what they raised the money on. Because they went to the investors and they said, I've got a pipeline of $1 billion worth of projects. And the investors are like, that's exciting. So then they would invest the money because the money was cheap. And then they fit out these factories and then interest rates change. And then the developers come back and they're like, we're not going to build those projects.
Because they're not
So now,
tied to
now,
that.
now the
Right.
factories are sitting on overhead, labor, costs, and there's no new projects coming because the developers are like, we're going to wait this out and see until we feel confident again that interest rates that we can predict them for a little while. So for a little while, just nothing will get built. So that's the historical death cycle for modular. I think, for us, we weren't trying to find a customer who we could satisfy with our product. We were identifying land and sites where our cost made the most sense and could be leveraged. So we didn't think about, what price per square foot do we need to be able to satisfy a developer. We looked at what are the sites where our build costs will create the maximum yield from an investment perspective. So that is a very, very different model because we had our folks on our team out there looking at sites with the model because we would take down the site, we would secure the site, control the site, and then line up the financing to build the project. It was a very different model than selling it as a product. And it was a step to then say, well, because the model was if we can reduce the cost to build, then that means that we can create the equity in the investment stack for the real estate. And on the market rate side, that gives us the ability essentially to manufacture equity out of thin air, which is massively lucrative. And on the affordable side, it gives us equity which we can contribute so that people can own. So that what's missing in the equity stack on the affordable side is, and this is where you get into like the deep weeds of like why the industry is so messed up is because if construction costs are doing this and incomes are doing this, this can't be financed. So what it means is on the affordable side, it's endless subsidy forever.
Yep.
And so that was kind of the core of it. Um, and the
So
beauty of it
knowing
is the whole thing
everything, like
scales.
that, you have such incredible knowledge now about modular construction, about construction itself. So for the next cycle, would you come back to the construction industry? Because it would be such a shame to see all and the next round of modular companies come up and start from the beginning when you all have made so much progress and you, using your knowledge or your experience, help them proceed and start at a much more advanced stage.
I talked to some people about this, but it's not construction. Like I just don't view it as a construction problem. Construction is construction. It's fine. Like construction is very efficient for what it does. If you think about the complexities of building a site, construction is very efficient, whether it's done on site or done in a factory, that can be a choice. There's good reasons to do either, but that's not where the solution lies. The solution is in development and incentives. Like, look at what happened. It's fascinating. You're not far away from Austin, right? So Austin's this fascinating market because a few years ago they had a housing crisis, right? So a bunch of people were moving to Austin. They were driving up the rents. So now people were being displaced. So now there's an emergency. So now we need to greenlight development. Let's get a lot of development going. So the whole bunch of multifamily gets greenlit. A whole bunch of folks start to build. They build a ton of multifamily product in the market. What happens? Rents go down. So then rents go down, which was the goal, right? So rents go down. And now all of a sudden it's very difficult to finance things because now you can't really develop in that market. So that's the core of the conundrum. Like if you solve the problem, you create the problem. So that's the like how do you if that's the model, what do we think is really going to change? Like nothing's really going to change. But what can change on the development side of it is we had from the beginning, we had an intention and a focus in everything that we did. And we knew that it was complicated and we knew that it was much more difficult than doing it in a more conventional way. But our goal was to solve the structural issues with housing, which have to do with development, right? So, how do you structure a company so that it can become more and more efficient and scale and deliver market rate and affordable housing in a model that increases in value as it scales? And so and the way to do that is to leverage the fact that developers don't innovate. I mean, that's the opportunity. If you are an innovative developer, costs money to create a new product and a new process. But if you let's say that you're building in, and you could pick a market. You could say, Southern California, and you're building in Southern California, let's say the market is building for, conservatively at this point, let's say it's building for $500,000 a door, right? To build multifamily in Southern California. And let's say you've spent, 5, 6 years, and I don't know, maybe you've spent 20, $30 million developing a system that can build for 400,000 a door consistently, repeatedly. You're the only developer who can do it. What changes? Like, what changes if you're in that position? If you're in that position and you have the ability to build for $400,000 a door in a $500,000 market, same quality, same, probably better efficiency, better NOI, but you can do it. And you've proven it. You've done some projects, you've put them in the ground, they've been financed, they're cash flowing, you're taking the cash flow off those projects. So that's the first thing. Like, what does that mean in terms of what you can pay for land? What does it mean in terms of what you bid for? What does it mean in terms of what you can finance? If you can build 400 in a 500 market, you can finance, you can take what you need for land. Recessions are an opportunity to take down more land. I mean, all those things happen. Now, let's say you put 6, 7, 8 projects out into the market that are cash flowing and returning cash back into the core business. And that then now that drops you down. Now you can build maybe for 350 a door, right? And the
Yeah.
rest of the market's now building for 650 a door. You're going in different directions. And that's the model, because the developers who think that way and are able to culturally and source the capital and culturally understand the core tenets of product development and manufacturing, and leverage those as internal advantages and capabilities, the financial rewards are mind blowing, just because no one else can do it. No one else is structured to be able to do that. The issue, though, is it doesn't take, $100,000 to figure that problem out.
Yeah.
It takes, a significant amount of capital investment. Yeah.
Yeah. And all this knowledge, I hope this podcast becomes like a time capsule so people can come back to it and use all this knowledge that you're sharing with the industry for their betterment and for the betterment of the entire construction and development industry. But it would, like I already said, would be a shame for you to not come back in some sort of role, as a developer role or construction role, during the next cycle.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean,
We'll
it's
see.
it's
Yeah.
always it's never you never know. That's been the thing that I've learned to trust in
Yeah.
my career, is sort of just following instinct and seeing where it leads, and it's led to some different places. But I've been doing some advisory work with different folks, but it's also taught me a lot about the types of cultures and mentalities and consciousness that will enable organizations to succeed in it, because it's a really difficult problem.
Yeah.
And it's more than, what'll end up making it work will be, money and people. So the money side of it can be sourced. The people side of it is its own concern.
Hey everyone, this is abrupt, but I decided to cut my podcast with Aaron into 2 parts. We had such an excellent discussion that I couldn't bring myself to edit anything out. While this first part of the conversation focused on his work at Blokable, the second part is going to be about mental health in the AEC industry. It's a very important and serious topic. I felt that it deserved its own podcast. So thank you for sticking around to the end of this one, and I'll see you for the next one.